Mount Vernon. 266. Territory. The expanse of territory that was now the United States was ceded from its colonial mother country alone. It included millions of sparsely settled acres south of the Great Lakes line between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. The tentative colonial migration west became a flood during the years of the Revolutionary War. Virginia's Kentucky County counted 150 men in 1775. By 1790, 15 years later, it numbered over 73,000 and was seeking statehood in the United States. 403. Britain's extended post-war policy for the U.S. continued to try to establish an Indian buffer state below the Great Lakes as late as 1814 during the War of 1812. The formerly acquired Western American lands continued to be populated by a dozen or so American Indian tribes that had been British allies for the most part. 378. Though British forts on their lands had been ceded to either the French or the British prior to the creation of the United States. 404. Natives were not referred to in the British cession to the U.S. 405. While tribes were not consulted by the British for the treaty, in practice the British refused to abandon forts on territory they formally transferred. Instead, they provisioned military allies for continuing frontier raids and sponsored the Northwest Indian War, 1785-1795, including erecting an additional British Fort Miami, Ohio. British sponsorship of local warfare on the United States continued until the Anglo-American Jay Treaty went into effect. 405 AO. At the same time, the Spanish also sponsored war within the U.S. by Indian proxies in its southwest territory ceded by France to Britain, then Britain to the Americans. 403 of the European powers with American colonies adjacent to the newly created United States, Spain was most threatened by American independence, and it was correspondingly the most hostile to it. Ap. Its territory adjacent to the U.S. was relatively undefended, so Spanish policy developed a combination of initiatives. Spanish soft power diplomatically challenged the British territorial cession west to the Mississippi and the previous northern boundaries of Spanish Florida. 407. It imposed a high tariff on American goods, then blocked American settler access to the port of New Orleans. Spanish hard power extended war alliances and arms to southwestern natives to resist American settlement. A former Continental Army general, James Wilkinson, settled in Kentucky County, Virginia in 1784, and there he fostered settler secession from Virginia during the Spanish Allied Chickamauga-Cherokee War. Beginning in 1787, he received pay as Spanish Agent 13, and subsequently expanded his efforts to persuade American settlers west of the Appalachians to secede from the United States, first in the Washington administration, and later again in the Jefferson administration. 407. Casualties and Losses. A cemetery. Gravestones in the foreground in staggered, irregular rows. Behind them grass-covered mounds of dead, an American flag in the background along a tree line. Revolution headstone is for Saratoga, mass graves. The total loss of life throughout the conflict is largely unknown. As was typical in wars of the era, diseases such as smallpox claimed more lives than battle. Between 1775 and 1782, a smallpox epidemic broke out throughout North America, killing an estimated 130,000 among all its populations during those years. 39. Ac. Historian Joseph Ellis suggests that Washington's decision to have his troops inoculated against the disease was one of his most important decisions. 408. Up to 70,000 American patriots died during active military service. 409. Of peace. Approximately 6,800 were killed in battle, while at least 17,000 died from disease. The majority of the latter died while prisoners of war of the British, mostly in the prison ships in New York Harbor. 410 are. The number of patriots seriously wounded or disabled by the war has been estimated from 8,500 to 25,000. 411. The French suffered 2,112 killed in combat in the United States. 412. As. The Spanish lost a total of 124 killed and 247 wounded in West Florida. 413. At. A British report in 1781 puts their total army deaths at 6,046 in North America, 1775-1779. 39, or approximately 7,774 Germans died in British service in addition to 4,888 deserters. Of the former, it is estimated 1,800 were killed in combat. 11. AV. Legacy. The American Revolution established the United States with its numerous civil liberties and set an example to overthrow both monarchy and colonial governments. The United States has the world's oldest written constitution, and the constitutions of other free countries often bear a striking resemblance to the U.S. Constitution, often word for word in places. It inspired the French, Haitian, Latin American revolutions and others into the modern era. 420, U.S. motto Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new age now begins. 421, or, although the revolution eliminated many forms of inequality, it did little to change the status of women, despite the role they played in winning independence. Most significantly, it failed to end slavery, which continued to be a serious social and political issue and caused divisions that would ultimately end in civil war. While many were uneasy over the contradiction of demanding liberty for some, yet denying it to others, the dependence of southern states on slave labor made abolition too great a challenge. Between 1774 and 1780, many of the states banned the importation of slaves, but the institution itself continued. 422, in 1782, Virginia passed a law permitting manumission, and over the next 8 years more than 10,000 slaves were given their freedom. 423, with support from Benjamin Franklin. In 1790 the Quakers petitioned Congress to abolish slavery. Winkins at Smiley. 424. The number of abolitionist movements greatly increased, and by 1804 all northern states had outlawed it. 425. However, even many like Adams, who viewed slavery as a foul contagion, opposed the 1790 petition as a threat to the Union. 426. In 1808, Jefferson passed legislation banning the importation of slaves, but allowed the domestic slave trade to continue, arguing the federal government had no right to regulate individual states. 427. Historiography. A large historiography concerns the reasons the Americans revolted and successfully broke away. 428. The Patriots, an insulting term used by the British that was proudly adopted by the Americans, stressed the constitutional rights of Englishmen, especially no taxation without representation. Contemporaries credited the American Enlightenment with laying the intellectual, moral and ethical foundations of the Revolution among the Founding Fathers. Founders referred to the liberalism in the philosophy of John Locke as powerful influences. Although two treatises of government has long been cited as a major influence on American thinkers, Historians David Lumberg and Henry F. May demonstrate that Locke's essay concerning human understanding was far more widely read than were his political treatises. 429. Historians since the 1960s have emphasized that the patriot constitutional argument was made possible by the emergence of a sense of American nationalism that united all 13 colonies. In turn, that nationalism was rooted in a republican value system that demanded consent of the governed and opposed aristocratic control. 430. In Britain itself, republicanism was a fringe view since it challenged the aristocratic control of British political system. Political power was not controlled by an aristocracy or nobility in the 13 colonies, and instead, the colonial political system was based on the winners of free elections, which were open to the majority of white men. In the analysis of the coming of the Revolution, historians in recent decades have mostly used one of three approaches. 431. The Atlantic history view places the American story in a broader context, including subsequent revolutions in France and Haiti. It tends to reintegrate the historiographies of the American Revolution and the British Empire. 432, 433, 434. The new social history approach looks at community social structure to find cleavages that were magnified into colonial cleavages. The ideological approach that centers on republicanism in the United States. 435. Republicanism dictated there would be no royalty, aristocracy or national church but allowed for continuation of the British common law, which American lawyers and jurists understood and approved and used in their everyday practice. Historians have examined how the rising American legal profession adopted British common law to incorporate republicanism by selective revision of legal customs and by introducing more choices for courts. 436, 437. Commemorations of the Revolutionary War. After the first U.S. postage stamp was issued in 1849, the U.S. Post Office frequently issued commemorative stamps celebrating the various people and events of the Revolutionary War. However, it would be more than 140 years after the Revolution before any stamp commemorating that war itself was ever issued. The first such stamp was the Liberty Bell issue of 1926. 438, selected issues. 150th Anniversary of American Independence. Issue of 1926. 150th Anniversary of American Independence. Issue of 1926. 150th Anniversary of Saratoga. Issue of 1927. 150th Anniversary of Saratoga. Issue of 1927. 150th Anniversary. Issue of 1928. 150th Anniversary. Issue of 1928. 150th Anniversary of Yorktown. Issue of 1931. 150th Anniversary of Yorktown. Issue of 1931. See also 1776 in the United States, events, births, deaths, and other years. Timeline of the American Revolution. Topics of the Revolution. Committee of Safety, American Revolution. Financial costs of the American Revolutionary War. Flags of the American Revolution. Naval operations in the American Revolutionary War. Social history of the Revolution. Black Patriot. Christianity in the United States / American Revolution. The Colored Patriots of the American Revolution. History of Poles in the United States / American Revolution. List of clergy in the American Revolution. List of patriots, American Revolution. Quakers in the American Revolution. Scotch-Irish Americans / American Revolution. Others in the American Revolution. Nova Scotia in the American Revolution. Vdorga Association. Lists of Revolutionary Military. List of American Revolutionary War battles. List of British forces in the American Revolutionary War. List of Continental forces in the American Revolutionary War. List of infantry weapons in the American Revolution. List of United States militia units in the American Revolutionary War. 13 Colony economy. Economic history of the U.S. Colonial economy to 1780. Shipbuilding in the American colonies. Slavery in the United States. Legacy and related American Revolution statuary. Commemoration of the American Revolution. Founders online. Independence Day, United States. The Last Men of the Revolution. List of plays and films about the American Revolution. Museum of the American Revolution. Tomb of the Unknown Soldier of the American Revolution. United States Bicentennial. List of Wars of Independence. Bibliographies. Bibliography of the American Revolutionary War. Bibliography of Thomas Jefferson. Bibliography of George Washington. Notes. A2 Independent Corps regiments, the Congress's own regiments, were recruited among British Canadians. The 1st Canadian Regiment formed by James Livingston of Chambly, Quebec, Winkinsad Smiley 1, and the 2nd Canadian Regiment formed by Moses Hazen of Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, Quebec. 2. B. Augustin de la Balme independently marched on Detroit under a French flag with British Canadian militia recruited from western Quebec, Ohio County, Virginia, at the county seat of Kaskaskia, Cahokia, and Vincennes. 3. C. Until 1779. D. 65% of Britain's German auxiliaries employed in North America were from Hesse-Kassel, 16,000, and Hesse-Hanau, 2,422, flying this same flag. 5. 20% of Britain's German auxiliaries employed in North America were from Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, 5,723, flying this flag. 6. F. The British hired over 30,000 professional soldiers from various German states who surveyed in North America from 1775 to 1782. 8. Commentators and historians often refer to them as mercenaries or auxiliaries, terms that are sometimes used interchangeably. 7. G. From 1779. H. Peace process. March 1782 Parliament recommends George III make peace. December 1782 George III speech from the throne for U.S. independence. April 1783 Congress accepts British proposal that meets its 4 demands. September 1783 conclusive treaty of peace between Britain and United States. May 1784 diplomats in Paris exchange the subsequent ratifications by Parliament and Congress. 9. I. Arnold served on the American side from 1775 to 1779. After defecting, he served on the British side from 1780 to 1783. J. 1780-1783. K. The total in active duty service for the American cause during the American Revolutionary War numbered 200,000.12.
Keep this in 6 parts. I'm going to read this again later. So let's charge the camcorder.